Good morning. This is the first meeting of the Joint Legislative Management Committee for the 2021-2022 biennium. This meeting is called to order, and the first order of business is to elect the chair. Are there any nominations?
I move to nominate Senator Ballant for chair.
Senator Ballant has been nominated. Are there any other nominations? Okay, seeing no other nominations, nominations are closed, and all those in favor of Senator Ballant as chair, please raise your hands.
Oh.
All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. And all those opposed? Okay, Senator Ballant has been elected chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
I would like to nominate Speaker Kowinski as vice chair.
Speaker Kowinski has been nominated as vice chair. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, nominations are closed. All those in favor of Speaker Kowinski as vice chair, please raise your hands. Okay, looks like you have a majority and Speaker Kowinski is your vice chair. So Madam Vice Chair, the next item on your agenda is to review the committee statutory charge. Would you like me to do that?
Yes, please go right ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So this committee, the Joint Legislative Management Committee, is created in Title II. At Chapter 2, the overall purpose is to provide general oversight and management across the offices of the General Assembly and to coordinate the operations of the Office of Legislative Operations and its delivery of shared administrative services to the legislative offices of the General Assembly. More specifically, your charge is to prepare a proposed budget for the legislative branch that includes a budget for each legislative office, to approve requests for new permanent positions in staff offices as appropriate for inclusion in the proposed legislative budget, to approve the reallocation of existing positions among staff offices as appropriate, to approve and adopt policies that apply across the legislative branch, including compensation and benefits plans, personnel policies, and policies relating to information technology, and to attend to other relevant management and oversight matters.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions about our charge? Okay, seeing none, I think we have up next Dan Dickerson from Joint Fiscal to talk about the budget process and the legislative budget presentation.
Can I jump in?
Sure, go ahead.
My internet, is it working?
Yep, I can hear you.
Unstable. Sorry, I'm just looking for where this is posted. Is it on our committee webpage, or maybe Mike can tell me where the charge and the budget are posted?
I have posted them to the legislative webpage and will send that link, but they are on the Joint Ledge Management Committee webpage.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other? Yeah, no questions. No problem. Any other questions before we go over to Dan? All right, seeing none. Dan.
Good morning, everyone. For the record, Daniel Dickerson from the Joint Fiscal Office, and I'm going to share my screen so that you can see a copy of the memo that hopefully you received last night. It was a little late, so I apologize for that. So the memo basically gives a really brief run through of where the budgets, where we hope the budgets to be as a branch, and then I'll have itemized budgets by office. But as Jen mentioned, your charge is to prepare a proposed budget for legislative branch that includes a budget for each office. And so what you have in front of you is where we as the Joint Fiscal Office landed in creating budgets in collaboration with the other departments. So we're starting at FY21, 16,344,030. This is as a branch, our entire or cumulative appropriation. The drivers basically are one, maintaining base services, and I'll go into that in detail. But the pressure is about 382,000, and that was covered in the governor's budget proposal that came out, I guess, a couple weeks ago now. We would like 3 new positions within the branch, and those cost about 295,000 a year. These positions were not included in the governor's budget, nor was there language. I guess the funding for the positions was not included and the language creating the positions was not included in the governor's proposal. But those 2 increases cumulatively would raise our appropriation to a little over 17 million, which is 677,000 up from FY21, a 4.1% increase. I will say that if you just take the costs needed to maintain base services alone, our budget growth is about 2.3%. So it's the positions definitely increase costs, but 4.1% is still relatively modest. And we had proposed reversions that were sufficient to cover almost the entirety of those cost increases. I dug through the governor's budget and I could not find anywhere where the governor had included any of the reversions that we had proposed. So as of right now, those reversions aren't built in. But if we were to, if you were to okay the positions and the appropriations committees were okay with the positions, then we would at least have money to cover those costs in 21. And then if the legislature wanted to take more for other spending priorities, then we have one-time money available for that. So I'll just reiterate, the governor's proposed budget for the branch did include funding to cover sort of our base service growth, but did not fully fund the positions nor include language creating the positions. Any questions on that first page of the memo?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
You're saying that the governor's budget does not include spending of the positions. We, of course, have not made a decision on them. So it's not a matter, I just want to confirm, we didn't request them and it was denied, as opposed to it simply wasn't a fully developed request at the point the governor was developing his budget. I just want to be clear. You're telling us it's for information, the governor's budget doesn't include it, so we would have to address it. But at no point has the governor's office weighed in on this additional spending on the positions.
I will confess that we got a little ahead of ourselves, and that was just because of everything happening very close to the end of the calendar year. And so when we presented our budgets to the branch, we did make them aware that we were hoping for 3 new positions, but they were also aware that Jlmc had not seen these requests yet. And so, like I said, we were a little ahead of where we should have been, but it was just by virtue of the fact that, we needed to get the numbers to the governor in short order, and there wasn't yet a new Jlmc. So they were aware of the positions and did not include them in the governor's budget.
Thank you.
So I'll move on to page 2, and this is where I sort of touch on in a little more detail some of the pressures that led to our budget growth. So when we were preparing budgets for FY21, we had obviously presented something back in January prior to the pandemic, and then the pandemic set in, the academic shock, and we subsequently adjusted each department's budget down by 2%. And for some departments, this was pretty easy. And others, it was much more difficult to find savings that that were sort of one-time in nature rather than that would be ongoing. And that's just because, for Joint Fiscal Office, for example, or Legislative Council, almost all of our cost is personnel. And so it's hard to cut expenses without cutting personnel. And so there was pressure right at the get-go to get budgets up to a more sustainable funding level, given the cuts that we incurred in FY21. Pay Act was another pressure. Most legislative staff received the 1.9% ongoing salary increases in 20. So taking alone, that alone is about a quarter of our growth, or what would be our growth from 21 to 22. And then finally, the three new positions, and you can see them here. I think the department heads are going to give you a rundown, and which is more appropriate, but you'll at least see what the ongoing costs are. This is salaries and benefits. And like I said, it's about it's just under 300,000 per year for across the branch for the three new positions. And then briefly, just jumping back, when we went to the administration, we did offer up about 675,000 in reversions from across the branch. But even beyond that, we are sitting on a lot of carry forward money, and even from when I developed the budgets back in November, December to now, I think that likely has increased, given that, you know, I had built in the assumption that the legislature would be back in person probably after town meeting week, which, you know, I think is probably not likely at this point. So we have money that, you know, if the appropriations committees identify this as money that could be used elsewhere, we could give it back. And most of that money is within the legislature's budget, but other departments have some as well. Yeah, sorry, any questions on page 2 before I jump forward?
Does anyone have any questions? I'm looking through. I don't see any. Dan.
Finally, you'll just see the breakdown of budgets by department. You see the growth percentages, you know, for IT and Sergeant Arms, those are just, they look so big because of the new position that's built in. It would be much more modest if the positions weren't there. But, you know, across the branch, we're at about 4.1%. And we hope that you support our budgets. And that is all.
Any questions for Dan? Okay. All right. So I think we have a presentation of position request. Is that right? Starting with Legislative Council.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Luke Marlin, Director of Legislative Council. And I know Jen Carby's on. I think Michael O'Grady is in another meeting. And I don't see Nadine Martin, the head of Traffic and Operations, but I don't see her, but I hope she'll join us. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'll just very briefly summarize why we're requesting this position, and then, of course, answer any questions you have. Our view was it would be a year-round position, so it's not session only. Salary of approximately $50K. Dan had estimated up to $33K of benefits. It may be less, of course, depending on what insurance plan the individual may choose. But you're talking about a roughly $50,000 per year salary and then benefits on top of that. And the reason why we requested this is we don't have any, currently we don't have any paralegals or support. We have attorneys which cover subject areas, as you well know. We're fairly leanly staffed, and we think this position could help us in a number of ways. First of all, this individual could fulfill some legal duties. Most law firms, most legal organizations have a paralegal or two, or some kind of support. And this person could help us with research, could help us with correspondence, could help us perhaps in statutory revision. This person also perhaps could help with policy research. If you remember, the NCSL report recommended establishing a policy staff because we don't currently have that. Ultimately, the decision was made not to pursue that. And we were unsure whether establishing a staff of policy experts is necessary, but we do think we need some greater capacity, not only to help with legal issues, but also to help with administrative tasks and policy research as appropriate. And then last but not least, we are being crushed by certain functions that are not core functions, but take an increasing amount of time. For example, responding to Public Record Act requests. Tucker Anderson, who's one of our attorneys, spends an inordinate amount of his time now, a significant portion of his time responding to these that keep growing and get more and more complex. We've now assigned another attorney to back them up. This is an example of other functions that take away from our core duties of researching and writing legislation and supporting you folks. And the paralegal could step in and we hope alleviate some of that burden. So we think there's a need. We think it has to be year round as opposed to session only. We want someone who really develops in this role and learns a role. And we're guessing about 50K salary and then benefits on top of that. Jen, did I miss anything? Or is there anything you'd want to add to that?
No, I think that's good. I think the one small piece that I would also add that we're hoping this person can help with is that we do spend a lot of time writing letters and memos, whether they're budget memos or letters from a committee or a chamber to the executive branch or to the congressional delegation. So that's another area that we could use some assistance to take that off the attorneys.
So I don't see Michael on. So Jen and I would answer any questions you may have.
Anyone have any questions for Luke?
Thank you.
Oh, wait, I see one, Representative Leclerc.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, all. Luke, is there any way to take a look back and without causing a lot more time and effort on your part to take a look at the increase in the workload that you folks are having to deal with, whether it be legislation introduced to, the Freedom for Information Act type of things like that? Is there a way to kind of quantify the additional workload in a very quick snapshot type of worksheet?
We could. I think Jen and I could probably give you some of that off the top of our heads because we look at this all the time.
Sure.
And so as far as relevant to the paralegal position, there's certain things that aren't really an increase in workload, but still we need help with. That could be the letters that Jen mentioned, the administrative tasks, stat rev, which is something that takes a huge amount of time. And we just could need help in that area. The public records, we can give you more information, but we've done a breakdown. It is taking weeks and weeks of Tucker's overall time over the course of a year. And this was never a core function. This was something we did, but it was something we would do once in a while to help out. Now it's become a repeating, ongoing duty. For example, there was a request that sought thousands, I think actually it was tens of thousands of records during the spring and summer. So the number of requests has grown, the depth or complexity of those requests has grown substantially. Research is something that has always been there. I don't know if it's grown. We try to do it when we can, policy-related research, when we can on the side. And as our workload overall has increased, that is just something that sometimes falls by the wayside, would like help with. All of you are aware of our increasing burden of bills. Hasn't really gone up this year over the past years. I brief you folks, whether you're on Ledge Council Committee or whatever, almost every biennium we see a slight increase. What's noticeable about this year is it hasn't declined. So we thought it might decline. It hasn't really gone up, but you're still talking about thousands of bills a biennium. So support on research for those, support on writing simple ones of those, support on processing those or handling stat rev. That's the kind of things that we could use help with. Jen,
Very
would
good.
you add to that?
No, I think you got it.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Colston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, everyone. Luke, is there a ratio of the number of lawyers per paralegal that is a standard in the field? If so, how do we compare to that?
I don't know if there is such a ratio. To be clear, our ratio right now is 0.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a ratio. I've never worked in any of my prior jobs without having some legal support, but the ratio, varied widely. So for a well-funded private law firm, I really couldn't say. For most government jobs, I've always had paralegals, but I sorry, I can't tell you a ratio. I certainly can't tell you for Vermont.
Thank you.
Jen, do you Do you know off the top of your head? Have you dealt with it? I haven't. Okay.
I don't think there's any particular standard metric that's used. I think it's more identifying the need and meeting the need.
Any other questions for Luke? Senator Kitchell?
Well, this is not related to the position, but I'm really, I'm very troubled by the proliferation of FOIA requests and the amount of resources it's taking both legislative and the executive branch. It is staggering. And sometimes it's a single individual. But my question, when you're talking about what happened this summer with tens of thousands of documents, at some point, I think we probably need to have a policy around the expense or the parameter. It just seems like there are some provisions to help underwrite the cost for these requests on the part of the requester. So I would just put that out as maybe an item that we might want to talk about at a future meeting, because this is something that is sneaking up on us, but the staff time involved is pretty incredible at this point.
Yep, that's a very good point. We could put that on the list of things to address in future meetings, for sure.
And we also think that there should be uniform policy across our branch.
Yeah.
Because you're right, Senator, it's grown and we would like to see consistency and discuss these issues. So thank you.
Okay. Senator Ballant?
So earlier this week, Luke had done some number crunching with Tucker Anderson. I'm wondering if that email that you sent to me regarding the amount of time that Tucker has spent would be helpful for everybody on JLMC to peruse at this point, just as a starting point, because Jane brings up an excellent point. I think we need to get our hands around what we're talking about here. And here's one person who has had to take more and more hours of his day dealing with this. It might be a good starting point.
We can do that. Let's, Jen and I can look it over and I think we can forward it. Let's just check and then we can forward it to you. Would probably ask that it not be posted on the website, but we can certainly forward it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Luke. Representative Leclerc?
I would echo having as many people come in and talk about that issue as possible, but I would encourage us. The Secretary of State, I know, has some very strong views and opinions around that, and he might be a good person to come in and speak with us.
Thank you. All right, any other questions for Luke before we move on to Kevin and IT? Nope. All right, thank you, Luke. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, members of the committee. For the record, Kevin Moore, Director of IT for the legislature. Similar presentation to Luke's here. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Certainly happy to answer questions as they come up. We're really looking to fill a long-standing need in our department. When we were a part of Legislative Council, we once tried to fill this type of position in the past, and we were rather unsuccessful in doing so for a period of about 3 years. During that time frame, we also identified an additional need within our department surrounding cybersecurity, and instead pivoted with that position, available position, and filled it with a cybersecurity professional instead. The need hasn't gone away. If anything, it's drastically increased over the last year. And we're currently dependent on outside web development firms in order to really provide the modern technology support that we find ourselves needing. We have many web applications that were developed over the last several years that our various staff offices depend on. And we have several that we can envision going down the line to help bolster the capacity of other offices and help their efficiency. However, being dependent on an outside firm, it not only is slower, it typically costs more per project. It's not nearly as nimble when and if there's an issue that arises. As we're all pretty painfully aware, we have pretty short turnaround times expected from our staff and other staff, especially during the legislative session. And when you have to negotiate that service level agreement with an outside firm, it gets dramatically more expensive when you expect that really quick turnaround time. We're not supporting and maintaining our applications as well as we could. That's an issue that we've had, again, long standing. We have capacity issues. We're a pretty lean team to begin with, and we were stretched rather thin over this past year. So this would also help bolster capacity in the department, help with coverage when and if we have a staff member who is absent for the day for whatever reason. It would really allow us to continue moving forward with application support and web development. It's something we're hopeful for. We're budgeting 85,000, up to 85,000 a year for the salary. We are competing with the open market on this. So we're also budgeting for full benefits, of course. But we're truly looking for a seasoned professional with a strong web application background to join our team and add to our capacity. Happy to answer questions. Again, just for a quick recap, we're looking at maintaining and developing our existing stuff, our websites, our internal intranet pages, databases, supporting infrastructure, and then expanding on that moving forward.
Thank you, Kevin. Senator Kitchell.
Thank you. Kevin, I had a question. You said right now we're contracting it out. So I'm just looking, when you're asking for this funding, are you adjusting it any? The cost of it is the incremental cost between, are you factoring in any of the costs that are currently being experienced by going the contractor route and using and moving those funds that are in your base budget to support this position? So in other words, just rather than contracting, do it with a direct position. So does the 85,000, is that the 100% of the cost and new? And if that other money is still in the base, how much have we been spending for the contracting? And what are your thoughts about how that money could be better utilized if that's your plan?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So for this first year, we are not including the existing contracted expenses. We anticipate about a 12 to 18 month ramp up, if you will. It's really acclimating a developer to our particular environment and making sure that they're effective and cross training with the outside contractor during that time for that knowledge transfer. It's incredibly critical to have that knowledge transfer. One other thing I neglected to mention is we do anticipate some succession planning in the near future being very important to this role as well. In the long run, we do anticipate a decrease in the need for contracted services, contracted support for this role, and that would reduce the overall budget ask going forward. Currently, oh goodness, we have it in a handful of line items. I want to say we spend about 50,000 a year for the limited support that we, the cumulative cost for the limited support we reach these developers for.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Kevin? Senator Benning.
Kevin, as we get out of Zoom and go back to the legislature, how do you see your needs changing?
I very much see our needs continuing more than changing, Senator. One of the things that we continue to see a request for is an expanded capacity specifically for legislators. As you're all aware, we issue iPads. And while they work, generally speaking, for content delivery, they're not nearly as powerful a device as what we would expect for this type of environment. Going forward, one of the projects we hope to propose in the future is what we call a legislator dashboard. That legislator dashboard would be kind of a one-stop shop for each legislator to subscribe to bills, perhaps communicate with attorney clients or their attorney-client communication, looking for potentially co-sponsoring floor organization when you're sitting on the chamber floor to try to keep up with the clerk's office and what's actually happening when things shift around throughout the day. So we expect an increased demand from our clients over the next couple of years rather than slowing down.
The dashboard situation would normally be something you'd have to do outside of house?
Correct. So we don't currently have the capacity to create something of that caliber. It really requires a highly talented developer in coordination with others to create something of that nature. We do have some in-house development capacity currently, but it is typically for legacy technologies and supporting the legacy sites that we currently have in place.
Okay.
Senator Ballant.
So Kevin, in thinking about ongoing needs and increased risk from a cybersecurity standpoint, as much as we move more to the web or to the cloud, the need for increased security, I would assume has to be baked in. And I'm wondering, to what extent does this appropriation request factor those needs in?
Thank you, Senator. It would actually be incredibly beneficial for our department to have this position from a cyber security perspective. The reason being is that right now we have competing interests. When you contract with a web development firm, their job is to complete the website, make it work, and make it available. Our in-house cybersecurity professional at that point then turns around and tries to break the site and find all of the vulnerabilities. That can increase time and material support from the vendor, rather than having that communication and collaboration start very early and continue through the process like we would with an in-house team. It's a substantially different process when you have people working together, understanding what those capacities are, understanding what those needs are and the requirements of the department long in advance, rather than trying to spend a good portion of your contract or your retainer with this web development firm on planning meetings versus actual development. A much tighter integration is what we hope for.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions? All right, seeing none.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up, we have Janet Miller. Good morning, Janet.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the meeting. I'd like to begin. This is Janet Miller, Sergeant at Arms, and we're talking about our new police position request that we're making. And I'd like to just tell you, for some of you that may not know, or some new members of the committee, that we asked for the new position in 21, but there wasn't total agreement between the House and Senate. But for the 22 budget, we're asking for the other police position again for original reasons, which were the fact that we want to keep 2 people on at all times. And between childcare, family obligations, training, administrative work that the Capitol Police have to do, and just being able to give the people their time off leaves us, the Capitol Police, short. And I'd like to point out, in light of the new political climate and the events of January 6th at the DC Capitol, we feel it more important to keep 2 people on. For the 22 session, we may still be spread out across the buildings. We don't know. And if that is true, that would also help us manage that. I'm going to let Matt drill down in on some of the increases of calls and things that we have. But the legislature isn't here now, but in the future, we will be back. And I'd like to point out that it isn't as easy to just hire a police officer. As you might understand, there's not as big a pool of people that probably want to be police officers at this time. And so I'm trying to figure that out. And here we are at the State House, and it's a unique position for a police officer and comes with some different nuances. So I'm going to pass it over to the chief. If anyone has a question for me, I'll be happy to answer now or later. But go ahead, Chief, if you're there.
Oh, good morning, Madam Chairs and the committee. Matthew Romei, Capitol Police Chief. Does everybody hear me okay? I'm working from home today, so
yep.
I appreciate the time to visit today. We are asking for an additional police officer. When the Capitol Police were formed in 1999, we were formed with 4 full-time positions, which is where we sit today. Over the last 25 years, we have 4 major security assessments done of the State House and the surrounding area. And one of the commonalities in each one of them has been an increase in staff to meet the ongoing needs for security and law enforcement. I am able to show, and if you'd like to see them, I'll be happy to share them up. But we've got numbers now back to by fiscal year back to really decent numbers back to the 16-17 fiscal year, and each year we see about 15 to 25% growth in calls for service, both for the Capitol Police and in the wider Capitol complex, where other law enforcement agencies are responding to those calls. Additionally, out of a 20-80-hour employee, a full-time employee, when you account for the hours that are required to be spent off campus in training, annual leave, sick leave, personal leave, those add up to take about 25% of that 2080 away. So anytime that we see a position out there, you actually have to have more than one human to cover that. Succession planning, as Kevin mentioned for his shop, is important to us as well. It takes about 3 years to figure this job out because of the idiosyncrasies involved in working around the State House. I expect within the next 5 to 7 years, we will see 2 retirements out of our full-time staff, and those are going to be exceptionally difficult to replace. The full-time Capitol Police officers are subject to the mandatory 55 retirement going forward. So it's tough to think about, grabbing a state trooper that may be retiring or another law enforcement officer to come into this job. So it is going to complicate some of the recruitment processes. That's really about all I've got. I'm happy to answer any questions. I would say, I mentioned that 15 to 25% increase in calls, and I would just point you towards a couple of recent events that, one call for Montpelier on the lawn actually turned into a multi-day 44-page investigation. So one call for service may be a very small blip in the day, and it also may be a week or more out of rotation for an officer that's having to deal with an intensive investigation or a longer term process for what they're doing.
All right, any questions for Janet or the chief? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. All right, so we've heard all of the budget presentations, and just wanted to open it up for any general discussion or thoughts before we move on to committee planning. Representative Ansel.
Great, thank you. I'm just trying to understand the timing on these requests. The requests have come to us to approve these positions as part of the proposed budget that then goes to the Appropriations Committee, and the hiring process would wait then until July 1st at the earliest. Is that correct?
I understand that is correct. Does anyone object to that reading?
That's just my understanding of it.
I'm just looking around the table. Yep, Luke agrees.
Thank you.
Representative or Senator Kitchell, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I'm wondering if we're talking about whether that reversion actually occurred, whether that money is there to support an earlier start on recruitment. And I that was one of the questions that was raised. What happened? What is the status of that amount of money? So I would just point that out, that you could authorize the positions and move forward now, earlier on. It seems like some of them, particularly, the paralegal, where you're trying to help support a lot of the workload that's currently being experienced, and IT, I'm just talking about obviously with the building being empty, but some of them are identified to support existing workload as of today. So I think that to me is the critical question is there that reversion money? And I see Steve Klein is on, so
Yeah.
maybe he can answer that question.
Yeah, you do have that capacity. So if you were to decide to make these effective on passage, you could finance them with the existing resources we have.
But you have to confirm that the status.
You would have to create the position and make it effective on passage. We have the cash to cover the cost.
Okay, that was my question, because I thought in earlier testimony, Dan indicated that there was some question about whether those reversions had been built in. And that's what I'm asking to
Okay,
get clarity on, because if they're already been assumed somewhere else, then that's a different story than they're uncommitted and still available.
Let me just try one time, and then maybe Dan can clarify if I'm wrong. Or if you want to do so, the 675,000 has not been built in. We would still revert the 675. We have over $1 million of other money that is still carried forward in the line item. So if we would ended up deciding, even if we reverted the 675, we have the capacity to cover any. We build a fair amount of capacity because you aren't like the executive branch. In the executive branch, they can take money from lots of corners. You pretty much have to live on your own boat. And for that reason, we try to build a budget that gives you flexibility to meet needs as they arise. So this would fall in that category.
So,
Representative Ansel, go ahead.
Steve, you've several times said you could decide. Do you mean the legislature, or are you
Correct.
talking about this committee?
No, the legislature would have to.
That's what I thought. So we don't get to decide anything other than to make the recommendation.
Right.
And if the legislature decides to agree with us, they could make the decision on passage, which would accelerate things to some extent. Is that my understanding that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Dan, did you want to add anything, or are you good?
Steve said exactly what I would have said. So
Okay.
fine.
Luke?
One issue is, I think, if you approve this or suggest this be approved, is the positions. And I know that Ledge Council had unused positions. I believe they're all now under the oversight of Jlmc. I don't know, maybe Steve and Dan could answer this question, but I don't know if you need to create new positions. I think there might be unused positions if that is helpful.
And that would be something the legislature could, I would imagine, would go through the process with the committees. We'll talk about that. In your case, using an unused position would be great, whether the IT or the legislative, the Sergeant Arms position would be one we'd transfer a position, or whether we create a new one would be, I think they'd discuss.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Kitchell?
Yeah, just to follow up on that. There's more than one train leaving the station here. And that is, we know that we are going to have to do sort of a smaller mini spending bill to move some money out quickly. So, there is a vehicle if we feel, if we identify any positions that we would want to move forward immediately, either to convert or to fund, but that would require getting the necessary information. Are there available positions? Do we need to authorize the creation and authorize the spending? So there's an ability to move forward if we say this position we feel is needed right now. We could look at and make a recommendation that be included in this bill. It would run at a faster rate than the big bill would be able to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, Representative Leclerc.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Based on Jane's question, do we have a rough idea of a timeline that we're looking to address these issues within?
The COVID recovery bill, we're looking to expedite and have on the floor in potentially 2 weeks. In terms of our recommendations here, Joint rules has not met yet to approve joint committees to vote. And so for us, we're hearing information today, but we don't have the authority yet to vote on something. So heads up, everyone, there is a joint rules meeting being planned for this week. You'll be getting a notice about that shortly for those of you who are on joint rules. Representative Ansel.
Well, I was just going to point out that we voted for a chair and a vice chair. I hope that was good.
I think we could get away with that one.
Good.
All right. Any other questions, feedback, thoughts on these budgets or new positions? Okay, great. Thank you. So next we'll move to committee discussion and planning. Senator Kitchell mentioned FOIA requests, so we can have that on the agenda for a future meeting. Really excited to have our new HR director starting in April. I know Arlene has been reaching out to key people in legislative council and joint fiscal and offices across the legislative branch to do some meet and greets. We'll send out, Senator Ballant and I will send out an official welcome email to all members introducing her in March. And I know that there are some other events happening to help to get her meeting with everyone and making her feel welcome as she hits the ground running. I know Senator Ballant and I also wanted to mention that we have approved a remote work expenditure for members to take. We are still saving money since we are not in session. We're not all in the State House together. We're governing remotely. And we know that the House and the Senate still need to make a decision about working remotely in the coming months. So those are some decisions out there that still need to be made that could impact the budget in some way. Senator Ballant, do you have anything to add to that list?
I don't. I just wanted to thank the speaker for pinch hitting for me this morning. I left at 5:30, but given the snow from Brattleboro all the way up, it took a lot longer than I thought. So I apologize. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for jumping in.
Anytime. We're just glad you're there safe. All right. Anything else to add to future meetings, agenda topics? Senator Kitchell?
I did have a question. We received a memo from Luke relative to salary adjustments. And so is that more informational, or do we have to review and approve? That was more of a process question.
Do you want me to try to answer that?
Go ahead, Luke.
That was more informational. I don't think it's something that should be discussed today or needs to be discussed today. We would love, when I say we, Jen and Michael and Nadine and I, if I'm still here, would love to talk to you about that at some point. But I don't think it needs to be discussed today. We weren't, that's why it wasn't on the agenda for today. And as I talk in the memo, that's really looking towards June-ish, July-ish to have those go into effect. So you have some time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Giving members one more moment for any ideas you may have for a future agenda item. Senator Benning?
I'm just curious with respect to making decisions by both bodies as to when to return. Maybe that's something we ought to take a more formal position on as by way of recommendation to both bodies, and have some evidence presented to this committee as to what the rollout time period would be in order for us to make some intelligent choices in making that recommendation. This committee last time around sort of had some discussion about that. And I would hate to have each individual body trying to decide on its own without any initial recommendations from a group that combines both bodies. So just a suggestion.
Mhm. I know that joint rules also plays a role in that as well. So, but thank you. Yep. Representative Leclerc, did you? Nope.
Just briefly, as far as a future agenda, and I may think it ties in what we just discussed about, I'm like to talk a little bit more about workload.
Yep. Okay. Senator Kitchell.
Well, we know that we're going to have the HR director in April. And I'm just wondering if I don't know when our next meeting is, but out in the future, in light of the position reporting, I think it's important that we have Arlene come and present sort of her view of the position, sort of her plan of work ahead. And so I would just put that on the agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Representative Ansel and I have been in touch and looping Senator Ballant in as Arlene starts pulling together what she's hearing and themes. So that absolutely flows into the work that she's already starting to do to prepare to start. So absolutely. Yeah, Representative Ansel.
And I was going to mention that she was included on the invitation list this morning, but she has meetings at her current workplace and wasn't able to be here. But we will include her on future information about JLMC.
Senator Ballant.
Just an ongoing question for all of us to consider. How do we roll out for members and for senators what the role is that she will be playing, since we've never had anyone in this role? I think there's going to be a fair amount of adjustment period it's going to take some time, right? And so I'm just wondering how we can be proactive in explaining, because you were involved in this process for months and months, right? And so many of those discussions didn't include the whole legislature. So just thoughts on that. Don't need to talk about it today, but having a plan for educating everybody else.
If I could jump in, I think that would be a great discussion for us to have when she's part of the discussion. And I think that probably what Senator Kitchell was talking about for this next meeting will probably involve some of that. Mm-hmm. What we have talked about doing is to have her begin to set up what I would call meet and greets with groups of staff members. Really just to introduce herself, and I'll work with Mike and Arlene to start to set those up. And if I'll make that invitation to any of the department heads who are here, if you'd like to set that up. She has a couple days set aside in early March, the first week in March, that it would really not an information gathering session so much as this put a name and a face together and sort of begin to get to know some of the people who work in our building. So if you're interested in doing something like that for the staff in your office, if you could send an email to Mike and me, and I think you probably have Arlene's email address as well. We can make those happen. I think that would be a nice way to start to get her known in the building.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Representative Ansel, for your work in helping to be our liaison with Arlene as she gets onboarded. Thank you.
Yeah, she's very excited about starting. And I think she's, had great conversations with people, and I think she'll be a real asset, but it is going to take time to sort of figure out exactly what the role is from her perspective as well as ours.
Right. Thank you. Janet?
Thank you. I hope it's okay that I ask perhaps for an agenda item, but we'd like to talk about at some point the body camera, because the report was given to JLMC. It was due to you, and we did submit that. So I think that at some point would be great if we could have that on the agenda.
Yep. Thank you, Janet. All right. Anything else to add before we wrap?